I want to talk about impartiality, being objective. Being objective means that you're able to put aside any personal feelings you might have about a person and give them credit where credit is due, but also criticize them when criticism is due. That's what impartiality is all about. And that's what I practice here on this channel. I don't care if I think a person is the greatest human being on earth, or if I think they're the devil incarnate. When it comes to their work, I will give them credit where credit is due, and I'll also criticize them when criticism is due. That is my approach. Now, let me talk about certain promoters. Certain promoters are petty. And because they're so petty and so overzealous when it comes to threatening people with legal action for the slightest, tiniest little thing, certain promoters will often not be called by their real name. They'll be given a pseudonym. And that is a way of avoiding any kind of legal repercussions, because certain promoters have tried to sue people on boxing forums, on Twitter, on Facebook, newspapers, people on YouTube. Certain YouTube channels have been threatened with legal action by certain promoters. Now, say what you like about Eddie Hearn. I've criticized him plenty of times. Eddie Hearn does not behave like this. Eddie Hearn has lots of people cracking jokes about him, saying things about him all over the internet, but he's not chasing down people on boxing forums, on Facebook, on Twitter, on YouTube, and threatening them with legal action. Those are the actions of a very, very petty individual. And so people who defend certain promoters and accuse others of being petty for giving them colorful nicknames, you need to look at the actions of certain promoters and wonder why people are treating them like that or referring to them in that way. Defenders of certain promoters would say, well, if they're threatening you with legal action, these certain promoters, then clearly you're doing something wrong. Clearly you're saying something untrue. And what I would say to that is, no, not necessarily. For one, there is often a big difference between what is moral and what is legal. Just because something is legal, it doesn't make it moral. And just because something is illegal, it doesn't make it immoral. And I'll give you examples specifically when it comes to suing people. Jimmy Savile, when he was still alive, threatened to sue people who wanted to expose him in the media. He kept them quiet with the threat of legal action. Does that mean Jimmy Savile was morally in the right? Clearly not. It's not about what you know, it's about what you can prove. And certain promoters know this. How many promoters do you know that when a fighter leaves them, they straight away want to start coming out with just vicious vitriol in their newspaper columns, talking about a fighter who a couple of months ago, when the fighter was still signed to them, they were singing their praises. But the second the fighter leaves them, they're spewing nothing but vitriol about them. How many promoters do you know that do that on a consistent basis? Not on a one-off or occasional basis, but how many promoters do you know that have been doing that consistently for year and year and year and year after year, going back decades? How many promoters do you know that do that? Because I could tell you again, Eddie Hearn, yeah, he does sometimes have little digs at former fighters of his, but nowhere near, not even close to the level of certain promoters who are vicious and spiteful and really petty with the stuff they try and say about many of their former fighters, particularly in the immediate aftermath of the fighter leaving them. They could do a complete 180 where when the guy is signed to them, they're singing his praises, he can't do no wrong. The minute he leaves, oh, he's terrible, he's awful, he will never be successful, etc., etc., etc. Certain promoters behave like that. Certain promoters will also try and threaten fighters who leave them with legal action on a very, very consistent basis. And not only would they threaten them with legal action, they will go after them with so much venom and spite that their objective is to actually financially cripple the fighter. That is their objective. And again, I'm not an Eddie Hearn fanboy. I think Eddie Hearn is hilarious when it comes to his banter, but there are plenty, and I think he's done a great job in promoting. But there are lots of things, including the StubHub issue, including Eddie Hearn contradicting himself all the time, etc., etc., etc. There are lots of things I criticize Eddie Hearn for. But one thing I can't criticize him for is legally going after fighters who leave him and trying to financially ruin them year in, year out. I can't criticize him for that because he don't do that. But there are certain promoters who do that. There are certain promoters who have been doing that for decades. And you want to talk about respect, because certain promoters have done so much in the game of boxing and have achieved so much and have done so many great things for the sport. Well, Don King did many great things for the sport of boxing. But are we afraid to criticize Don King? Because Don King also treated a lot of fighters like dirt over the years. So yes, I can give Don King credit for the amazing shows that he's put on over the years. I've watched countless Don King shows live. But that's not going to stop any objective person from looking at Don King and also criticizing the character of the man, because he has behaved like an outright scumbag for many, many years. This is well known. This is out on public record. Go to Don King's Wikipedia page and see a lot of the things which have come out publicly about him. Now, there have been many, many fighters over the past few years who have come out and said months or sometimes a year after their fight, they've still not been paid by certain promoters. And you want to talk about respect. How much respect do certain promoters have for fighters when they're treating them like that? There's only 2 promoters who I personally know about, 2 major promoters who have been physically attacked by former fighters. And when I mean physically attacked, I mean with serious violence. Only 2 promoters, major promoters I know about who have had that happen to them. One of them is Don King. The other one, well, I'll let you guys figure that out for yourselves. And also when it comes to certain promoters, birds of a feather flock together, because certain promoters were taken under the wing by Don King and shown the ropes by Don King and got a lot of their tricky ways and unscrupulous ways from Don King, because they were working with him for many, many, many years and even regard him as a friend. Birds of a feather flock together. You might want to do your research on that. Some of you guys who are not necessarily in the know. So, there you have it, man. I don't understand why certain people want to come to the aid of certain promoters when certain promoters, yes, they've done good shows over the years, and I'm sure certain promoters will continue to do good shows, but they've also behaved like complete scumbags, like very, very petty, vicious egomaniacs. And so what? I'm not supposed to occasionally poke fun. I'm not supposed to protect myself just in case of any kind of legal action by not referring to them in certain ways. You know? Objectivity is not being afraid to criticize anyone, no matter how great a work they've done. And also not being afraid to praise someone, no matter how horrible they've been. And that's the stance I take. Anyway, hope you guys have gained some insight here. Hope you've enjoyed my musings. Drop your comments in the comment section below. It's happening. I'm out.